In the deepest corners of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like morning mist, there exists a legend whispered in 1,000 different tongues. They speak of a creature so broken that even the gods turned away, yet so fierce that death itself learned to fear his name. Some say he was born human. Others claim he was forged in the fires of a dying star. But every species across the known universe agrees on one thing. When the Reaper comes for you, silence follows. This is the story of Marcus Kane, a man who lost everything, including his voice and freedom, only to discover that sometimes the most powerful warriors are those who have nothing left to lose. Sometimes it takes an alien speaking your forgotten name to remind you who you truly are. The galaxy is vast, cruel, and unforgiving, but it has never met anything quite like humanity's capacity for vengeance wrapped in justice, delivered by hands that refuse to stay chained. Welcome to the legend of the Reaper, where silence speaks louder than words, and one man's broken spirit becomes an entire galaxy's salvation. The mining asteroid designated XK 739 rotated slowly through the void, its scarred surface telling the story of decades of brutal extraction. Deep within its hollowed core, where the air recyclers wheezed and artificial gravity pulled at everything with the weight of broken dreams, Marcus Kane swung his plasma cutter in perfect rhythm. The tool hummed against the rock face, sending cascades of sparks across his weathered features. He had not spoken in 3 years, for months, and 16 days. The neural collar around his neck ensured his silence, its biomechanical tendrils burrowing deep into his spinal column. Any attempt to vocalize brought waves of agony that could drop a grown man. The hegemony had been thorough in their punishment. They had taken his voice, his freedom, his name, and relegated him to the designation of Mining Unit 7749. But they had not taken his memory. Marcus remembered the day the hegemony fleet arrived at Earth. He remembered the desperate defense, the hopeless last stand, and the moment humanity's home burned. He remembered his wife, Sarah's final transmission, her voice crackling through the static as the orbital platforms fell one by one. He remembered his daughter Emma's laugh, cut short by plasma fire. He remembered it all, because forgetting would mean they had died for nothing. The overseer's voice crackled through the mining sector's comm system, translated into a dozen languages for the various species that comprised the work crews. Production quota update. Sector 7 is behind schedule. Reduce rest periods by 20%. Around him, the other miners groaned or hissed or made whatever sound their species expressed frustration with. The Vorthack clicked their mandibles in anger. The Zalani skin shifted to deeper shades of blue, indicating stress. The few remaining humans just kept working, their eyes hollow with the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. Marcus continued his methodical cutting, muscle memory guiding his movements. Swing, cut, extract. Swing, cut, extract. The rhythm had become meditation, the only thing that kept his sanity intact in this place where hope went to die. The plasma cutter's weight felt natural in his hands now, balanced and precise. He had become efficient with it in ways that would have impressed his old squad mates from the war, if any of them were still alive. A commotion near the main shaft drew his attention. 3 guards in hegemony armor were dragging a new prisoner into the sector. The figure struggled weakly, clearly exhausted from whatever processing the hegemony put new inmates through. As they drew closer, Marcus caught sight of the prisoner's features and felt his blood freeze. It was a Kytherian, the species that had betrayed humanity during the final battle. The allies who had opened Earth's defensive grid to hegemony forces. The reason his family was dead. The guards shoved the Kytherian toward the workstations, and Marcus noticed something odd. Unlike the other prisoners, this one wore no neural collar, no biomechanical restraints, no visible signs of the hegemony's usual control methods. Instead, what looked like a translation device was clipped to the alien's ear, and its movements seemed more confused than subdued. Marcus forced himself to look away and returned to his work. The last thing he needed was trouble from the guards. He had learned to be invisible here, to blend into the background of suffering that permeated the mining facility. Survival meant keeping your head down and your hands moving. But as the shift progressed, he found his attention drifting back to the Kytherian. The alien was struggling with the basic mining equipment, clearly unfamiliar with manual labor. Its pale, blue skin showed signs of recent injury, and there was something in its movements that suggested fear rather than the resigned despair of a long-term prisoner. During the meal break, Marcus sat in his usual spot near the recycling units, mechanically consuming the nutrient paste that passed for food in this place. The Kytherian approached hesitantly, carrying its own portion. Most of the other inmates avoided each other during breaks, but this one seemed different. It sat down nearby, not quite close enough to be threatening, but close enough to be intentional. Marcus kept his eyes on his food, unwilling to engage. He had no desire to communicate with a member of the species that had sold out humanity. "You are human," the Kytherian said quietly, its translator rendering the words in accented standard. "I can tell from your bone structure, your posture." Marcus did not respond. Could not respond, even if he wanted to. "My name is Veltar," the alien continued, apparently unbothered by the lack of reply. "I was a researcher before everything went wrong. I studied human culture, actually. Your species fascinated us before the war." Still, Marcus remained silent. He finished his meal and prepared to return to his workstation, but the Kytherian's next words stopped him cold. "I knew humans who fought at the Battle of Titan Station. There was a squad leader there, Marcus Kane, who held the defense grid for 6 hours against impossible odds. They say he saved thousands of evacuation ships before the station fell." The plasma cutter slipped from Marcus's suddenly, nerveless fingers clattering against the metal floor. He stared at the Kytherian with wide eyes, his heart pounding against his ribs. No one had spoken his real name in years. He was Unit 7749, nothing more, nothing less. Marcus Kane had died with his family when Earth burned. Veltar noticed his reaction and leaned forward slightly. "You recognize that name. Interesting. The stories say he was captured during the final assault on Luna Base, that he disappeared into the hegemony prison system. Some claimed he was executed for war crimes, but there were always rumors." Marcus stood abruptly, scooping up his tool and walking away without looking back. But he could feel the Kytherian's eyes following him, could sense the weight of recognition in that alien gaze. His carefully constructed invisibility was beginning to crack, and that was dangerous for everyone involved. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of automatic movements. Marcus's mind raced despite his body's mechanical rhythm. How could this alien know about Titan Station? The official hegemony records listed that battle as a minor skirmish, not the desperate last stand it had actually been. And how could it know his name when even he had almost forgotten who he used to be? As the war period ended and the inmates filed back to their cell blocks, Marcus noticed Veltar being escorted in a different direction. The alien caught his eye one last time, and there was something in its expression that looked almost like sympathy, regret. It was difficult to read alien emotions, even after years of forced coexistence in the mining facility. Marcus's cell was a cramped rectangle of metal and recycled air, barely large enough for a sleeping platform and basic sanitation unit. He had learned to find comfort in its confines, to appreciate the privacy it offered after the constant surveillance of the work areas. Tonight, however, the walls felt closer than usual, pressing in on him with a weight of unwanted memories. He sat on the edge of his sleeping platform and stared at his hands. Calloused, scarred, marked by years of hard labor and harder choices. These hands had once held plasma rifles and detonation charges. They had saved lives and taken them in equal measure. Now they held mining tools and the desperate hope that tomorrow might be marginally better than today. The neural collar hummed softly against his neck, a constant reminder of his powerlessness. He had tried to remove it once, during his first month in captivity. The pain had been so intense that he had passed out and awakened in the medical bay with additional restraints and a warning that the next attempt would result in immediate execution. A soft sound in the corridor caught his attention. Footsteps that were too light to be guards, too uncertain to be another inmate returning from the common areas. Marcus pressed his ear to the cell door and listened. Someone was moving through the cell block, pausing at each door. The footsteps stopped outside his cell, and he heard the faint whir of an electronic lock disengaging. Impossible. Inmate cells only opened for guards, and then only under specific circumstances. The door slid open to reveal Veltar, somehow free of both guards and restraints. The Kytherian glanced quickly down the corridor before stepping into the cell, the door sliding shut behind it. "We need to talk," Veltar said quietly. "And before you ask how I got out, let's just say that hegemony security systems have some interesting vulnerabilities when you know how to exploit them." Marcus backed against the far wall, his muscles tensing for a fight. This felt like a trap, like some elaborate scheme to test his loyalty or uncover hidden resistance connections. He had survived 3 years by trusting no one and expecting betrayal from every direction. Veltar seemed to sense his suspicion. "I know this looks bad. Unknown alien breaks into your cell, claims to know things about your past. But I need you to listen, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything." The alien reached slowly into its clothing and withdrew a small data pad. The screen flickered to life, showing what appeared to be military records. Human military records, with Marcus's photograph and service history displayed in clear detail. "Your real name is Marcus Kane," Veltar continued. "Former lieutenant commander in the Human Colonial Defense Force. Veteran of 17 major engagements, including the defense of Proxima Station and the evacuation of New Geneva. You commanded the 47th Strike Team during the final phase of the war, and you were captured during the assault on Luna Base 3 years and 4 months ago." Marcus's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Seeing his own face on that screen, reading his own achievements laid out in clinical detail, was like being punched in the soul. He wanted to speak, to demand answers, to ask 1,000 questions. But the neural collar held him silent, its biomechanical grip tightening whenever his vocal cords tried to engage. "The interesting part," Veltar said, swiping to another screen, "is what happened after your capture. According to these records, you were supposed to be executed within 48 hours of arrival at Hegemony Central Command. Standard procedure for high-value military prisoners. But someone intervened. The new screen showed transfer orders, signed, and authorized by someone whose name was listed as classified. Marcus had been quietly moved from the execution queue to the mining program, his identity erased and replaced with a prisoner number. Someone wanted you alive, Veltar concluded. Someone with enough authority to override standard hegemony protocol. The question is why, and more importantly, who? Marcus pointed at the Kytherian, then at himself, his expression demanding an explanation for how this alien had obtained classified hegemony files. Veltar understood the gesture and nodded grimly. "That's where things get complicated. I'm not exactly a prisoner here, Marcus Kane. I'm something else entirely. Something that the galaxy desperately needs you to know about." The lights in the cell suddenly dimmed to emergency levels, and the facility's alarm system began a low, urgent wail. Veltar cursed in its native language and quickly shut down the datapad. "Guard rotation change," it explained. "I need to go before they discover I'm missing. But we'll continue this conversation soon. There are things you need to know, preparations you need to make. The galaxy is about to change, Marcus Kane, and humanity's greatest weapon isn't a ship or a bomb." The alien moved toward the door, which somehow opened at its approach. As it stepped into the corridor, it turned back one final time. "It's people like you who refuse to stay broken." The door slid shut, leaving Marcus alone with his racing thoughts and the echo of words he had thought he would never hear again. His real name, his real history, the suggestion that his suffering might serve a purpose beyond simple punishment. He lay down on his sleeping platform and stared at the ceiling, watching the play of shadows from the corridor lighting. For the first time in years, Marcus Kane allowed himself to think about something other than survival. He thought about possibility, about purpose, about the chance that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. The neural collar hummed its familiar tune of oppression, but somehow it seemed less absolute than before. Knowledge was power, and power could be patient. It could wait for the right moment, the right opportunity, the right reason to break free. Outside his cell, the mining asteroid continued its slow rotation through space, carrying its cargo of broken dreams and forgotten heroes toward whatever destiny awaited them all. But in one small cell, a man who had been Unit 7749 began to remember that he had once been something more. He had once been Marcus Kane, and Marcus Kane had never learned how to give up. The next morning brought no sign of Veltar during the work assignments. Marcus found himself assigned to Deep Shaft Gamma, one of the most dangerous sections of the mining operation where structural collapses were common and safety protocols were treated as suggestions rather than requirements. The guards claimed it was random rotation, but Marcus suspected his midnight visitor had not gone unnoticed by the facility security systems. He worked with methodical precision, his plasma cutter carving through the mineral deposits with practiced efficiency. Around him, other inmates struggled with their quotas, the constant pressure to produce more with less time driving some to the edge of collapse. The Vort hack named Krex, who worked the adjacent tunnel, had been showing signs of exhaustion poisoning for days. His mandibles trembled with each movement, and his usually steady hands shook as he operated his equipment. During the midday rest period, Krex finally succumbed. The insectoid alien collapsed against the tunnel wall, his breathing reduced to labored wheezes. The other workers backed away instinctively. Experience had taught them that helping injured inmates often resulted in punishment for interfering with facility operations. Marcus found himself moving before conscious thought could stop him. He knelt beside Krex and quickly assessed the situation. Exhaustion poisoning in Vorthack was similar to severe dehydration in humans, but their physiology required specific minerals to recover. Without medical intervention, Krex would die within hours. The nearest guard was 50 meters away, preoccupied with quota reports. Marcus made a decision that would have horrified his survival instinct from a week ago. He reached into his work kit and withdrew a small chemical analyzer he had been hoarding for months, originally planning to use it to identify valuable mineral deposits that he could trade for better food rations. Instead, he used it to test Krex's sweat composition and quickly mixed a solution from the mineral supplements in his emergency kit. It was a crude approximation of proper medical treatment, but it might buy the Vorthack enough time to recover naturally. As he helped Krex drink the solution, the alien's compound eyes focused on him with what looked like gratitude. Krex could not speak standard, but he managed a few clicks in his native language that Marcus somehow understood as thanks. Unit 7749 returned to workstation immediately. The guard's voice carried the casual threat that characterized all interactions with the inmates. Marcus stood slowly, gathering his equipment. As he walked away, he caught sight of other inmates watching him with expressions ranging from surprise to something that might have been respect. He had broken the first rule of prison survival: don't get involved. But somehow, it felt like the right choice for the first time in years. The afternoon shift proceeded without incident until an explosion rocked the deep tunnels. Emergency alarms filled the air as smoke began pouring from Shaft Beta, the primary excavation zone. Guards rushed toward the commotion, leaving the other work areas temporarily undermanned. In the chaos, Veltar appeared at Marcus's tunnel entrance. The Kytherian moved with purpose, no longer displaying the confusion of a new prisoner. Its eyes were alert and calculating as it surveyed the emergency response. Perfect timing, Veltar muttered, then focused on Marcus. We need to move. This distraction won't last long, and There are things you need to see before the facility locks down. Marcus hesitated. Following this alien deeper into the facility during an emergency was beyond risky. It was potentially suicidal. But the memory of his real name, spoken aloud after years of enforced anonymity, compelled him forward. He needed answers more than he needed safety. Veltar led him through service corridors he had never seen before, areas apparently reserved for facility maintenance and security operations. The alien moved with the confidence of someone who had spent considerable time studying the layout, confirming Marcus's suspicion that Veltar was far more than a simple prisoner. They emerged into what appeared to be a communications center, filled with monitoring equipment and data terminals that hummed with constant activity. Information streams flowed across multiple screens, showing mining quotas, prisoner locations, guard rotations, and, most disturbingly, experimental research data. Welcome to the real purpose of Mining Facility XK. 739, Veltar said grimly. The mineral extraction is just a cover. This entire operation is a research laboratory studying the breaking points of various species under extreme stress. Marcus stared at the data streams, his mind struggling to process the implications. Charts showed psychological degradation rates, physical endurance measurements, and something labeled as compliance optimization studies. His own designation, Unit 7749, appeared on several reports documenting his behavioral patterns and work efficiency over the past 3 years. They've been watching us, he realized, though the neural collar prevented him from voicing the thought aloud. Veltar seemed to understand his expression. Every movement, every interaction, every moment of despair or defiance. The hegemony is building profiles on how to most effectively control different species. Your people, the humans, have been particularly challenging for them. You refuse to break the way the models predict. Another screen displayed comparative data between human prisoners and those from other species. The graph showed that while most aliens reached psychological compliance within months of imprisonment, humans maintained resistance behaviors significantly longer. Some, like Marcus, showed increased efficiency over time rather than degradation. It's been driving them crazy. Veltar continued with something that might have been amusement. Every other species they've conquered follows predictable patterns. But humans keep surprising them. They adapt, they endure, they find ways to maintain hope even in hopeless situations. Marcus pointed at Veltar, then at the equipment, his expression demanding an explanation for how a supposed prisoner had access to all this information. The alien nodded, as if expecting the question. I told you I wasn't exactly a prisoner. I'm part of something called the Liberation Coalition, an alliance of species and individuals working to overthrow hegemony control. My mission was to infiltrate this facility and gather intelligence on their experimental programs. The alien activated a different terminal, and new information filled the screens. Star maps showing hegemony territories, fleet positions, and what appeared to be rebellion activity across multiple systems. Marcus recognized some of the tactical symbols from his military training. This was a war, and apparently it had been going on for longer than he had realized. The Coalition has been watching you specifically, Marcus Kane. Your resistance to their conditioning, your ability to maintain operational efficiency while refusing psychological compliance. You represent something they hadn't accounted for in their models. A new display showed video footage from Marcus's cell and work areas over the past year. The images showed him helping other inmates, sharing food rations, protecting weaker prisoners from violence, and maintaining what the reports labeled as irrational altruistic behavior, despite his own suffering. You've been building a network without even realizing it, Veltar explained. The inmates you've helped, the ones you've protected, they trust you in ways that should be impossible given the environment. That's not just admirable, Marcus. It's strategically valuable. The explosion they had heard earlier was not an accident. Marcus suddenly understood. The Liberation Coalition had orchestrated it as cover for this intelligence-gathering operation. which meant Veltar's presence here was part of a larger plan. "We're going to offer you a choice," the alien said. "You can remain Unit 7749, continue your sentence, and hope that someday the universe becomes more fair. Or you can become Marcus Kane again and help us turn this place into something the hegemony never intended." Before Marcus could process the full implications of that statement, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Veltar quickly shut down the terminals and guided him toward what appeared to be a maintenance shaft. "Think about what you've seen," the alien whispered as they prepared to separate. "Think about what you've lost, what you've endured, and what you might be able to change. I'll contact you again when you're ready to make a decision." They emerged through different routes, returning to their work areas just as the guards finished dealing with the supposed emergency. Marcus found himself back at his mining station, plasma cutter in hand, but his mind was racing with possibilities he had not dared consider in years. The revelation that his imprisonment was part of a larger experiment changed everything. It meant his suffering had been calculated, measured, and analyzed by beings who viewed him as nothing more than a test subject. The rage that thought produced was unlike anything he had felt since his family's death. But more importantly, it meant he was not alone. The Liberation Coalition's existence suggested that resistance was not only possible, but actively happening across the galaxy. Other species were fighting back, and they apparently saw something in humanity worth supporting. That evening, as he sat in his cell, contemplating Veltar's offer, Marcus noticed subtle changes in the behavior of other inmates. Krex, the Vort hack he had helped earlier, made a point of nodding respectfully when their paths crossed during the meal rotation. Several human prisoners who had witnessed his intervention began sitting closer to him during breaks, not speaking, but clearly indicating some form of solidarity. His actions had created ripples in the carefully controlled environment of the facility, and those ripples were being noticed by guards and inmates alike. Marcus realized he had reached a crossroads. He could retreat back into invisibility, protect himself by helping no one and drawing no attention. Or he could accept that his very existence was an act of defiance and begin to leverage that defiance more deliberately. The neural collar hummed against his neck, a constant reminder of his powerlessness. But knowledge was a different kind of power, and Veltar had given him knowledge that changed everything. The hegemony's grand experiment was producing results they had not anticipated. Human resistance was not breaking down over time. It was evolving. 3 days later, another incident provided Marcus with an opportunity to test his new understanding. A group of Zalani prisoners had been accused of stealing food rations, and the guard were preparing to implement collective punishment. The entire alien family unit would be placed in isolation chambers for a week, a sentence that was often fatal for their social species. In the past, Marcus would have watched the injustice unfold and done nothing. Self-preservation demanded invisibility, and involvement brought unwanted attention from the guards. But now he understood that his actions were being recorded and analyzed regardless. The hegemony was studying his responses whether he acted or remained passive. If he was going to be a test subject anyway, he might as well make the experiment interesting. During the confrontation between the guards and the Zalani family, Marcus deliberately dropped his plasma cutter near the feet of a lead guard. As the human bent to retrieve it, the tool's safety activated automatically, shutting down the mining operation in that sector. Standard protocol required all workers to evacuate immediately when safety systems engaged. The resulting confusion gave the Zalani family time to escape into the tunnel network, and by the time order was restored, they had disappeared into the facility's vast underground complex. The guards were furious, but they could not prove that Marcus's clumsiness was anything other than an accident. That night, Veltar appeared in his cell again, this time carrying a different kind of data pad. The alien's expression was thoughtful as it settled against the far wall. "You're learning," it observed. That was subtle, effective, and difficult to trace back to deliberate action. The kind of tactical thinking we need for what comes next. Marcus gestured toward the data pad, curious about what new revelation awaited him. Veltar activated the device, and the screen filled with images of other facilities, other prisons, other experimental installations scattered across hegemony space. There are 37 installations like this one, the alien explained. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners from dozens of species, all being subjected to various forms of psychological and physical experimentation. The data they're collecting is being used to design more effective control methods for conquered populations. The scale of suffering represented by those numbers was staggering. Marcus felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had driven him through the final battles of the war. But this time, the anger was cold and calculating rather than hot and desperate. The Coalition has been working for years to gather intelligence on these facilities, but we've never had someone on the inside with your particular combination of skills and resistance to conditioning. You could be the key to shutting down the entire program. Marcus pointed at himself, then spread his hands in a gesture that clearly asked how one broken prisoner could possibly affect such a massive operation. Veltar smiled, an expression that looked strange on alien features, but somehow conveyed genuine warmth. Because you're not broken, Marcus Kane. And, more importantly, you're not alone. We have resources, allies, and a plan that's been years in the making. All we need is someone who can coordinate resistance activities from inside the facilities. The alien showed him tactical information about Coalition fleet movements, supply lines, and communication networks. It was clear that this was not a desperate rebellion, but a coordinated military operation with significant resources and strategic planning behind it. The question is whether you're ready to stop being Unit 7749 and start being the Marcus Kane that held Titan Station for 6 hours against impossible odds. Looking at the data, studying the scope of the Liberation Coalition's operations, Marcus felt something he had not experienced in years. He felt hope. Not the desperate hope of a drowning man grasping at debris, but the steady hope of a soldier who sees a path to victory. He looked directly at Veltar and nodded once, firmly. The alien smile widened. Then, welcome back to the war, Commander Kane. Time to remind the galaxy why humanity never learned how to surrender. The transformation did not happen overnight. For weeks after his conversation with Veltar, Marcus maintained his routine as Unit 7749 while carefully observing the facility's operations with new eyes. He mapped guard rotations, identified security vulnerabilities, and began cataloging the skills and backgrounds of his fellow prisoners. What he discovered both surprised and encouraged him. The facility held far more than broken spirits waiting to die. Among the inmates were former military officers from a dozen species, scientists whose knowledge the hegemony wanted suppressed, and engineers who had designed the very systems now used to oppress them. The hegemony had made a critical error by concentrating so much expertise in one location, assuming that psychological conditioning would prevent any organized resistance. They had not accounted for Marcus Kane. His first recruit was Krex, the Vorthack whose life he had saved. The insectoid's compound eyes held intelligence that most humans missed, and his compound vision allowed him to spot security drones and surveillance equipment that others overlooked. During their shifts in adjacent tunnels, Marcus began teaching him basic tactical hand signals, disguising the lessons as work coordination. The second was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former human xenobiologist who had been captured during the evacuation of the research station at Kepler 442. She had been studying alien physiology when the war began, and her knowledge of different species' biological vulnerabilities was encyclopedic. Elena had maintained her sanity by treating her imprisonment as an extended field study, quietly documenting the effects of various control methods on different species. The third was Thane Korax, a Rigelian engineer who had designed shield generators for coalition forces before his capture. The reptilian alien possessed an intuitive understanding of energy systems that made him invaluable for any operation requiring technical expertise. His scales had turned a permanent dark green from years of despair, but Marcus detected sparks of the old fire when they discussed mechanical systems. Building trust required patience and careful demonstration of intent. Marcus shared his food rations with weaker inmates, consistently intervened when guards became violent, and slowly established himself as someone who could be relied upon. His actions created a network of obligation and loyalty that spread through the facility's social ecosystem like ripples in still water. The breakthrough came during a facility-wide stress test that the guards announced without explanation. All inmates were required to work double shifts with reduced food rations for an entire week. The stated purpose was efficiency evaluation, but Marcus recognized it as another data collection exercise designed to measure breaking points under increased pressure. On the fourth day, when exhaustion was claiming victims across multiple work details, Marcus implemented his first coordinated resistance operation. Using the hand signal system he had taught Krex and others, he orchestrated a series of minor equipment failures that forced production slowdowns without appearing deliberate. Plasma cutters developed mysterious power fluctuations. Loading vehicles experienced steering problems. Environmental controls required frequent adjustments. Each individual incident was easily explained as equipment stress under intensive use, but the cumulative effect was a 20% reduction in facility output. More importantly, it demonstrated to the growing network of conspirators that organized action was possible even under maximum surveillance. The guards responded by increasing punishment details and extending the stress test for an additional 3 days. But instead of breaking the inmates' resolve, the escalation only strengthened their determination to resist. Marcus found himself coordinating aid distribution, medical assistance, and morale support across species lines that had seemed impermeable just months before. Veltar appeared in his cell on the 7th night of the stress test, carrying equipment Marcus had never seen before. The alien's expression was grim as it activated what appeared to be a signal jamming device. "The Liberation Coalition has been monitoring your progress," Veltar said without preamble. "Command is impressed with what you've accomplished in such a short time. But we have a problem." The alien activated its datapad, showing surveillance footage from various points in the facility. The images clearly showed Marcus coordinating resistance activities, though they were subtle enough that the guards had not yet recognized the pattern. "The hegemony is beginning to suspect that your compliance scores don't match your actual behavior. There's talk of transferring you to a maximum security facility for enhanced interrogation. We need to accelerate our timeline." Marcus gestured questioningly, asking what timeline Veltar was referring to. The alien's answer was both thrilling and terrifying. "The complete liberation of Mining Facility XK-739, followed by its conversion into a coalition base of operations. We're talking about freeing every prisoner, capturing the research data, and sending a message to the hegemony that their experimental programs are no longer safe from retaliation." The scope of the proposed operation was staggering. Marcus had been thinking in terms of small-scale resistance and gradual improvement of conditions. Veltar was describing an all-out assault on one of the most secure installations in hegemony space. "The Coalition has been planning this operation for 2 years," the alien continued. "But it required someone on the inside who could coordinate prisoner activities during the assault. Someone the inmates trust and who understands military tactics. Someone exactly like you." New data appeared on the pad, showing the facility's complete layout, including areas Marcus had never seen. Security systems, command centers, communication arrays, and, most importantly, the location of the control systems for the neural collars. Everything needed to plan a successful breakout was laid out in precise detail. "The assault begins in 72 hours, Veltar announced. Coalition forces will attack the external defenses and create enough chaos to mask internal operations. Your job is to coordinate prisoner activities, secure key positions, and ensure that when the smoke clears, we control the facility rather than having destroyed it." Marcus studied the tactical information with the eye of a professional soldier. The plan was ambitious, but feasible assuming the coalition forces could deliver on their promise to neutralize external security. The internal phase would depend entirely on how effectively the prisoners could be organized and deployed. He pointed at the neural collar around his neck, then gestured toward the other inmates. How could they coordinate a complex operation when most of the potential leaders were unable to communicate effectively? Veltar reached into its equipment and withdrew a small device that looked like a medical scanner. Liberation Coalition technology. It can temporarily disable neural collars without triggering the pain response or security alerts. The effect lasts about 6 hours, long enough for the operation, but short enough to avoid detection during routine inspections. The implications were staggering. For the first time in years, Marcus would be able to speak, to give orders, to coordinate activities through voice communication rather than gestures and implications. The psychological impact alone would transform the facility's power dynamic. There's a catch, Veltar warned. The device only works once per collar. We have enough for about 30 key personnel, but that's all. Choose carefully. Over the next 2 days, Marcus refined his selection of potential leaders and coordinators. Each choice required balancing military capability, species-specific knowledge, and reliability under pressure. Elena would coordinate medical support for injured prisoners during the chaos. Thane would handle technical aspects of system control. Krex would manage coordination between different species groups. Others would lead assault teams, secure critical areas, and maintain communication between operational units. The morning of the operation dawned with artificial sunrise like any other day in the facility. Marcus went through his normal routine, but every gesture and movement was now part of a carefully orchestrated plan. As he worked his shift in Deep Shaft Gamma, coalition ships were moving into position in the outer system, preparing to announce humanity's return to the galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible. At exactly 1,400 hours facility time, the external assault began. The first indication was a vibration that seemed to come from the asteroid itself, followed by emergency alarms and the sound of guards running toward defensive positions. Marcus dropped his plasma cutter and activated the collar disruptor Veltar had given him, feeling an indescribable relief as the biomechanical grip around his throat relaxed for the first time in years. "All right, people," he said, his voice rough from disuse but carrying the authority of command. "Time to go home." The next few hours were a blur of coordinated chaos. Marcus's network of conspirators moved through the facility like a precision instrument, each team executing their assigned objectives while maintaining communication through the tunnel system. Elena secured the medical bay and began treating inmates who had been injured during years of abuse. Thane reached the main computer core and began downloading the experimental data that the Coalition needed to understand the full scope of hegemony operations. Marcus himself led a team toward the administration center, where the neural collar control systems were located. The route took them through sections of the facility he had never seen, past laboratories where the true horror of the hegemony's experiments became apparent. Surgical theaters designed for live dissection. Psychological testing chambers equipped with neural modification equipment. Holding cells that looked more like specimen containers than prison facilities. The guards they encountered were trained for external threats, not internal rebellion. Most surrendered immediately when faced with organized resistance from prisoners they had assumed were completely controlled. Those who fought discovered that years of mining work had left the inmates physically powerful and intimately familiar with industrial equipment that could double as weapons. By 1600 hours, they controlled the collar control center. Marcus watched with grim satisfaction as Elena used the medical override codes to permanently disable every neural collar in the facility. Around the complex, thousands of voices spoke freely for the first time in years, creating a cacophony of celebration in dozens of languages. But the real victory came when Thane activated the facility's communication array and transmitted a message that reached across the galaxy. "This is Commander Marcus Kane of the Human Colonial Defense Force, speaking from Liberated Mining Facility XK 739. To all hegemony forces monitoring this transmission, your experimental programs are ended. Your prisoners are free. Your assumption that conquered peoples will remain broken has been proven false. He paused, looking around at the diverse group of former prisoners who had fought together to reclaim their freedom. Species that had been enemies during the war now stood side by side, united by shared suffering and shared triumph. This facility now serves the Liberation Coalition. Any hegemony vessel approaching our position will be met with force. Any remaining experimental installations can expect similar liberation operations in the near future. The galaxy has changed, and those who profit from suffering should take notice. As if summoned by his words, Coalition warships began arriving in the system, their weapons trained on the scattered remnants of the hegemony defense fleet. The ships bore markings from a dozen different species, all working together in humanity's name. Veltar appeared at his shoulder, no longer disguised as a prisoner, but wearing the uniform of a Coalition intelligence officer. "How does it feel to have your voice back, Marcus Kane?" Marcus looked out through the facility's observation windows at the stars beyond, thinking of his wife and daughter who had died believing their sacrifice meant nothing. Thinking of the thousands of prisoners who had endured years of abuse while waiting for someone to remember that they were worth saving. "It feels like coming back from the dead," he replied, "but the work is just beginning." The Liberation Coalition had gained a valuable base of operations and dealt a significant blow to hegemony research programs. But more importantly, they had proven that even the most controlled populations could not be kept down forever. The galaxy's oppressed peoples now had proof that resistance was possible, that liberation was achievable, and that humanity had not forgotten how to fight for justice. Marcus Kane was no longer Unit 7749. He was no longer a broken prisoner waiting to die. He was exactly what the hegemony had feared he would become: a leader, a symbol, and a weapon pointed directly at the heart of their empire. The Reaper had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the liberation of Mining Facility XK 739, Marcus Kane stood in the command center that had once monitored his every movement as a prisoner. The transformed facility now served as a forward operating base for Coalition forces, its mining equipment repurposed into manufacturing systems that produced weapons, ships, and hope in equal measure. The data recovered from the facility's computers had revealed the true scope of the hegemony's experimental programs. 37 similar installations across the galaxy, each designed to break the spirits of specific species and identify the most effective methods of control. The intelligence had sparked coordinated liberation operations that were reshaping the balance of power throughout the known systems. Marcus had found himself at the center of it all, no longer just a symbol of resistance, but an active commander in the Coalition's growing military structure. His experience with hegemony tactics, combined with his unique understanding of how various species responded to oppression, had made him invaluable in planning operations against other installations. But success had brought new challenges and new enemies. "Commander Kane," Elena called from her position at the communications array. Her voice carried the tension that had become common as the Coalition's victories drew increasingly desperate responses from the hegemony. "We're receiving distress signals from Liberation Base Sigma 7. They're under attack by something our forces have never encountered before." Marcus reviewed the tactical display, studying the scattered reports coming from the besieged base. Sigma 7 was located in a former hegemony research station that specialized in biological weapons development. The Coalition had liberated it 3 months ago and converted it into a medical research facility focused on treating the various conditioning techniques used on prisoners. "What kind of attack?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The hegemony had been unusually quiet since losing their experimental installations. Intelligence suggested they were developing new approaches to the Coalition threat. "Unknown vessel configurations," Elena reported. No response to hails, no apparent crew, and weapons that seem to adapt to our defensive measures. Initial reports described them as ghost ships, but now the survivors are saying something else entirely. The main display filled with combat footage from Sigma-7's final transmission. Marcus watched with growing unease as strange vessels maneuvered through space with movements that defied conventional physics. They seemed to flow like liquid mercury, their shapes shifting and adapting as coalition forces engaged them. But it was not the ships themselves that made his blood run cold. It was the energy signatures they left behind, readings that matched nothing in the Coalition's extensive databases of known technologies. Those aren't hegemony vessels, Thane observed from his engineering station. The Rigelian scales had turned the deep crimson that indicated extreme concern. The energy patterns are wrong, the materials are impossible, and the way they move suggests some form of living technology. Marcus studied the combat data more carefully, cross-referencing it with intelligence reports from other sectors. A disturbing pattern emerged. Similar attacks had been reported at the edges of hegemony space, against isolated colonies and research outposts. Each incident had been dismissed as equipment failure or navigation accidents, but now the true scope was becoming apparent. Veltar, Marcus called to his intelligence liaison. The Kytherian had become his most trusted advisor, their shared experience in a mining facility creating a bond that transcended species boundaries. What does Coalition intelligence know about this? The alien's expression was grim as it accessed classified files. More than we've been sharing with field commanders, apparently. These attacks began shortly after our first liberation operations. Command suspected the hegemony was testing some form of advanced weapon system, but the evidence suggests something far worse. New data filled the display, showing attack patterns across multiple sectors. The mysterious vessels appeared without warning, destroyed their targets with unprecedented efficiency, and disappeared, leaving no trace of their passage. Most disturbing was the apparent intelligence behind their actions. They targeted Coalition bases specifically while avoiding civilian populations and hegemony installations. They're not random attacks, Marcus realized. Someone is directing them, and they have detailed intelligence about Coalition operations. Before Veltar could respond, proximity alarms filled the command center with urgent warnings. The facility's external sensors had detected incoming vessels, but the energy signatures matched nothing in their databases. Unknown contacts approaching from multiple vectors, reported the sensor operator, a former hegemony technician who had joined the Coalition after his liberation. They're using some form of stealth technology that's interfering with our targeting systems. Marcus moved to the main tactical display and studied the approaching threats. 5 vessels, each roughly the size of a Coalition destroyer, but moving with the fluid grace he had seen in the combat footage from Sigma-7. Their approach vectors suggested tactical knowledge of the facility's defensive layout, confirming his suspicion that this was not a random encounter. All defensive stations to maximum alert, he ordered. Prépare évacuation protocole, fort non-combat personnel. And give me a direct line to Coalition Command. If these are the same vessels that destroyed Sigma-7, we need to document everything for analysis. The first attack came without warning or communication. Energy beams, unlike anything in Coalition experience, sliced through the facility's outer hull with surgical precision, targeting specific systems rather than attempting general destruction. It was clear that whoever controlled these vessels wanted the base intact. They're not trying to destroy us, Elena observed as she coordinated damage control efforts. The targeting pattern suggests they want to capture the facility. Marcus watched the tactical display as the mysterious vessels continued their assault. Their weapons adapted to each defensive measure the Coalition employed, suggesting some form of advanced artificial intelligence or exotic control system. But there was something familiar about their tactics, something that reminded him of his own strategic thinking. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Veltar, pull up the files on the experimental data we recovered from this facility. Specifically, the projects related to neural conditioning and behavioral modification. The alien complied, though its expression suggested confusion about the relevance to their current situation. The files appeared on secondary displays, showing the various experiments the hegemony had conducted on captured prisoners. But Marcus focused on one particular project that had been labeled as failed and discontinued. Project Thanatos, he read aloud. Attempts to create perfect soldiers by combining advanced conditioning techniques with selected subjects who had demonstrated exceptional resistance to standard methods. The project was terminated after subjects began exhibiting behaviors that deviated from control parameters. Veltar's eyes widened as the implications became apparent. You think those ships are crewed by modified prisoners? People like us who were subjected to experimental conditioning. Marcus studied the attack patterns more carefully, looking for the human elements beneath the technological sophistication. The tactics were too aggressive for standard hegemony doctrine, but they showed the kind of innovative thinking that characterized human military strategy. Moreover, the choice to capture rather than destroy suggested someone who understood the value of coalition installations. Not just prisoners, he said grimly. Prisoners who were successfully conditioned, but retained their tactical abilities. The hegemony didn't abandon the project. They perfected it. The attacking vessels had reached the facility's inner defensive perimeter, and their assault was intensifying. But instead of pressing their advantage, they suddenly began transmitting on a frequency that made Marcus's blood freeze. It was the emergency channel used by human colonial defense forces during the war. Elena activated the communication system, and a voice filled the command center that made everyone stop their work and listen in horror. It was human, but distorted by electronic modulation that stripped away all emotion and personality. Coalition forces at Mining Facility XK, 739. You are harboring stolen hegemony property and interfering with authorized research programs. Surrender immediately or face termination. Marcus grabbed the communication controls, his mind racing through the implications of what he was hearing. If the attacking vessels were crewed by conditioned humans, then this represented a new and terrifying evolution of the hegemony's control methods. This is Commander Marcus Kane, he transmitted. Identify yourself and state your authority for these demands. The response came after a long pause, and when it did, Marcus felt the foundations of his reality shift beneath him. Marcus Kane, subject designation 7749. You're listed as missing from approved research parameters. Return to compliance or face corrective action. The voice paused, and when it continued, there was something almost like recognition in the electronically modified tones. This is Reaper Unit Alpha 7. Former designation Colonel Sarah Chun. Human Colonial Defense Force. I am authorized by Hegemony Command to retrieve escaped experimental subjects and restore proper order to unauthorized installations. The name hit Marcus like a nuclear explosion. Sarah Chun had been one of his closest friends during the war, a brilliant tactical officer who had commanded the defense of New Geneva. She had been captured during the final assault on Luna Base, just like him. But, unlike him, she had apparently not been sent to a mining facility. Sarah, he whispered, forgetting protocol in the shock of recognition. Sarah, it's me. It's Marcus. Do you remember the defense of Proxima Station? The evacuation of the research colonies? We fought together for 3 years. Another pause, longer this time. When the voice returned, it carried an edge of confusion that had not been present before. Marcus Kane, you're not in the approved location. You should be in Neural Conditioning Suite 7, undergoing Phase 3 compliance training. Your presence here violates multiple protocols. It was clear that Sarah's memories had been modified, but not erased. She remembered their past relationship, but interpreted it through the filter of whatever conditioning the hegemony had subjected her to. She saw him as a fellow test subject rather than a comrade in arms. Sarah, listen to me. Marcus transmitted, putting all the authority and emotion he could manage into his voice. You're not a Reaper unit. You're Colonel Sarah Chun, and you're one of the finest soldiers humanity ever produced. Whatever they've done to you, whatever they've made you believe, you're stronger than their conditioning. The attack on the facility suddenly stopped. The mysterious vessels held their positions but ceased firing, as if waiting for orders from a commander who was no longer certain of the situation. "You are attempting to introduce corrupted data into my operational parameters," Sarah's voice replied, but there was less electronic distortion than before. "This constitutes interference with hegemony property and requires corrective action." Marcus could hear the battle raging in her mind, the conflict between her artificial conditioning and her authentic memories. If there was any hope of reaching the real Sarah Chun, it lay in reminding her of who she had been before the hegemony broke and rebuilt her. "Remember the last night before the Luna base assault," he transmitted. "We sat in the observation deck and watched Earth burning. You said that even if we lost everything, even if humanity was scattered to the winds, we would find a way to come back. You said we were too stubborn to stay dead." The silence stretched for nearly a minute. When Sarah's voice returned, it was clearer than before, less distorted by electronic modification. "Marcus? Marcus, where are we? What happened to the fleet?" "The last thing I remember is the assault on the command center, and then..." Her voice trailed off, and when she spoke again, the distortion had returned. "No. Incorrect data parameters. I am Reaper Unit Alpha 7. I have my orders." But the doubt was there now, the crack in the conditioning that Marcus needed to exploit. Around the command center, Coalition personnel watched in fascination as one of their most dangerous enemies struggled with the return of suppressed memories. "Sarah, you have a choice," Marcus said quietly. "You can follow the orders they programmed into you, or you can remember what we were fighting for. The hegemony took everything from us. Our families, our homes, our freedom. But they couldn't take who we are, not if we refuse to let them." The attacking vessels began moving again, but their formation was less coordinated than before. It was as if their commander was uncertain about the mission parameters. I remember the mining facility." Sarah's voice came through the static. "They said you were dead. They said all the human prisoners were executed for war crimes. But you're here. You're alive, and you're fighting back." Marcus felt hope surge through his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Sarah was fighting a battle against conditioning that had been designed by experts who understood human psychology better than humans themselves. One wrong word could trigger responses that would lock her back into compliance. "I'm alive because people refuse to give up on me," he said. "The same way I'm not giving up on you. The hegemony made us into weapons, but they couldn't make us into slaves. Not permanently. Not if we help each other remember who we used to be." The moments stretched between them, filled with the weight of shared history and the possibility of redemption. Around the galaxy, the war between the Coalition and the hegemony continued to rage. But in this small corner of space, two old friends were fighting a different kind of battle for the soul of humanity itself. The choice Sarah made would determine not just the fate of the facility, but the future of every human who had been subjected to the hegemony's experimental programs. If she could break free of her conditioning, it might be possible to save others like her. If not, the Coalition faced an enemy that knew all their tactics and strategies, led by some of humanity's finest military minds, turned against everything they had once fought to protect. Marcus waited for her answer, knowing that the next few moments would reshape the entire conflict. The silence stretched across space like a hell breath. In the command center of what had once been Mining Facility XK 739, Marcus Kane waited for an answer that would determine the fate of not just his own life, but the future of human resistance against the hegemony. Around him, Coalition personnel maintained their positions while monitoring the 5 mysterious vessels that hung motionless in space, their weapons still trained on the facility, but no longer firing. "Marcus," Sarah's voice finally came through the communication system, clearer now than it had been since the conversation began. "I can see it. The conditioning, I mean. It's like having someone else's thoughts layered over your own memories. They made me forget what we were fighting for." The relief in the command center was palpable, But Marcus forced himself to remain focused. Breaking through initial conditioning was just the first step. The real challenge would be determining how many other humans have been subjected to similar treatment and whether they could be saved. How many others are there, Sarah? How many ships like yours? How many people like you? 17 operational units across 4 sectors, she replied, her voice growing stronger as she apparently wrestled control from whatever systems had been implanted in her mind. They call us the Reaper Corps. We were the most effective prisoners from the experimental programs. They spent years breaking us down and building us back up as perfect soldiers. Marcus felt his heart sink at the implications. 17 units meant potentially hundreds of conditioned humans, all turned into weapons against their own species. But it also meant that the hegemony's greatest strength could become their greatest weakness if those soldiers could be restored to their true selves. Can you contact the others? Can you reach them the way I reached you? Another long pause. When Sarah spoke again, her voice carried both hope and uncertainty. I'm trying. The communication protocols are designed to prevent unauthorized contact, but my command codes might be able to override the restrictions. Marcus, some of them might be too far gone. The conditioning becomes stronger over time, harder to break. We have to try, Marcus replied. Every person we save is a victory against everything the hegemony represents. And every soldier we restore to our side shifts the balance of this war. Over the next hour, Sarah worked to establish contact with the other Reaper units, while Marcus coordinated with Coalition Command to develop a strategy for dealing with this new threat. The revelation that the hegemony had been using conditioned humans as weapons explained several mysterious defeats that coalition forces had suffered in recent months. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked frantically to analyze the conditioning techniques, using data from Sarah's neural patterns to understand how the hegemony had achieved such complete control. What she discovered was both horrifying and encouraging. The conditioning is sophisticated, but not perfect, she reported to the assembled command staff. It works by overlaying artificial memories and motivations over the original personality, but the original remains intact underneath. With the right triggers, it's possible to break through. What kind of triggers? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Personal connections, shared experiences, emotional bonds that predate the conditioning. The stronger the relationship, the more likely it is to break through the artificial layers. Marcus nodded grimly. It meant that he and other survivors from the original human resistance would be crucial to any effort to restore the conditioned soldiers. It also meant putting himself and others at extreme risk by engaging with enemies who possessed all their tactical knowledge and abilities. Sarah's voice crackled through the communication system with an update. I've made contact with 7 other units. 3 are responding positively to memory triggers. 2 are fighting the conditioning, but haven't broken through completely. The others? She paused. The others are reporting my actions as a security breach. We may have company soon. As if summoned by her words, proximity alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Long-range sensors detected incoming vessels, but these were clearly hegemony ships rather than the organic-looking craft that comprised the Reaper Corps. Hegemony battle group approaching, reported the sensor operator. 12 heavy cruisers and support vessels. Estimated time to engagement range, 47 minutes. Marcus studied the tactical display, weighing their options. The facility's defenses had been significantly upgraded since its liberation, but they were not designed to withstand a full assault by capital ships. More importantly, the approaching fleet would complicate any attempt to continue reaching the conditioned humans. Sarah, can your ships fight alongside us against the hegemony forces? Affirmative, she replied immediately. Whatever they did to us, they couldn't make us stop being human. Not completely. My people remember who the real enemy is. The next 30 minutes became a desperate race against time. Coalition reinforcements were en route, but they would not arrive before the hegemony fleet engaged. Marcus found himself coordinating a defense that included not only coalition forces and liberated prisoners, but also former enemies who were fighting to reclaim their own humanity. The three Reaper units that had fully broken through their conditioning proved to be extraordinary allies. Their ships moved with the fluid grace that Marcus had found so unsettling, but now it served coalition purposes. Their weapons were incredibly sophisticated, apparently based on technology that the hegemony had been developing in secret. When the battle was joined, it became clear that the hegemony commanders had not anticipated facing their own advanced weapons. The Reaper ships tore through the enemy formation with devastating efficiency, their adaptive weapons systems overwhelming conventional defenses. But the real turning point came when two more Reaper units broke through their conditioning during the heat of battle. The shock of fighting alongside their former comrades, combined with the shared danger of combat, created the emotional stress needed to fracture their artificial programming. By the time coalition reinforcements arrived, the hegemony fleet had been completely destroyed. More importantly, 5 Reaper units had been successfully restored to coalition control, representing not just a significant military asset, but proof that the hegemony's ultimate weapons could be turned against them. In the aftermath of the battle, Marcus found himself in his quarters aboard Sarah's flagship, which had been designated as the new command vessel for what was being called the Human Recovery Project. The ship itself was a marvel of hybrid technology, combining captured hegemony systems with innovations that appeared to be uniquely human. "They wanted to make us into perfect soldiers," Sarah explained as she showed him around the vessel. Completely obedient, totally focused, without the emotional and moral considerations that they saw as weaknesses in human military doctrine. But they couldn't eliminate those traits without eliminating the creativity and adaptability that made us effective in the first place. She led him to what appeared to be a memorial wall, covered with names and images that Marcus recognized as fallen comrades from the war. "We kept this, even under conditioning. They couldn't make us forget our dead, though they tried to reinterpret why they died." Marcus studied the faces of friends and fellow soldiers who had given their lives in humanity's defense. Among them, he saw his own wife and daughter, their images somehow preserved and honored even by minds that had been turned against everything they represented. "The conditioning is breaking down across the entire Reaper Corps," Sarah continued. "Contact with restored units creates a cascade effect. The artificial memories become less stable when confronted with authentic human relationships." Over the following weeks, the Human Recovery Project expanded into a full-scale operation aimed at locating and restoring every conditioned human in hegemony space. It was dangerous work, requiring coalition forces to engage with enemies who possessed intimate knowledge of their tactics and capabilities. But it was also incredibly rewarding. Each successful restoration brought not just a powerful ally to the coalition cause, but also valuable intelligence about hegemony operations. The conditioned humans had been used for the most sensitive missions, giving them access to information that conventional intelligence gathering could never obtain. Marcus found himself at the center of the operation, his unique combination of tactical expertise and emotional connections making him invaluable for reaching the conditioned soldiers. But he was not alone. Other survivors from the original resistance emerged from hiding or captivity, each one capable of providing the personal triggers needed to break through artificial conditioning. The hegemony's response was swift and brutal. Realizing that their ultimate weapons were being systematically turned against them, they began destroying Reaper units rather than allowing them to be captured. The choice forced Marcus and the coalition to accelerate their operations, racing against time to save as many as possible. The final confrontation came at the hegemony's central conditioning facility, a massive space station hidden in a nebula at the edge of known space. Intelligence suggested that the remaining Reaper units were being held there for recalibration, effectively total memory erasure, followed by more intensive conditioning. The assault required every resource the coalition could muster. Human, alien, and restored Reaper units fought side by side in the largest space battle since the fall of Earth. The station's defenses were formidable, but they had been designed to keep enemies out, not to contain enemies fighting from within. Marcus led a boarding party directly to the conditioning chambers, where he found dozens of humans in various stages of mental reconstruction. Some were too far gone to save, their original personalities so thoroughly suppressed that restoration was impossible. But others retained enough of themselves to recognize old friends and comrades. The rescue operation succeeded, but at a terrible cost. The station's destruction eliminated the hegemony's ability to create new conditioned soldiers, but it also claimed the lives of many who could not be evacuated in time. Among them were humans who had retained just enough of themselves to choose death over continued slavery. In the aftermath, as coalition forces consolidated their control over former hegemony territories, Marcus stood once again on the observation deck of what had become the flagship of the human fleet. The view showed dozens of ships crewed by species that had been enemies just years before, all working together to rebuild what the hegemony had destroyed. Sarah joined him at the viewing port, her appearance now showing the scars of her conditioning, but also the strength of her recovery. "Do you think we've really won?" she asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. The hegemony had been broken, its experimental programs destroyed, its control over conquered populations ended. But the galaxy was still full of suffering, still home to injustice and oppression. The war might be over, but the work of building something better was just beginning. "We've won the right to try," he said finally. "The right to build something better than what came before. That's all any of us can ask for." Around them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the struggles of the small beings who had found ways to transcend their limitations through courage, sacrifice, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The legend of the Reaper had begun with a man who lost everything, including his voice and freedom. It ended with that same man helping to restore not just individual lives, but the hope that civilizations could choose justice over power, cooperation over domination, and redemption over revenge. The galaxy had learned something important from humanity's example. Sometimes the most powerful weapons are those who refuse to stay broken. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from saving them from themselves. And sometimes, in the darkest corners of space, silence really can speak louder than words, especially when it's finally broken by someone speaking your forgotten name, reminding you of who you truly are. Marcus Kane had become the Reaper not through death and destruction, but through his capacity to help others harvest new life from the ashes of their shattered existence. The galaxy was vast, cruel, and unforgiving, but it had never encountered anything quite like humanity's gift for turning ending into beginning, defeat into victory, and broken chains into wings.